Welcome to Artificiality from Helen and Dave Edwards. Artificiality is dedicated to understanding the emerging collective experiences we humans are having with AI and our fellow humans. Our work is grounded in the sciences of artificial intelligence, collective intelligence, complexity, neuroscience, and psychology, and framed through the lens of design, philosophy, and systems thinking. We're on this learning journey too, so we strive to find the frontiers, to ask the best questions, and to stay curious. We hope to open minds and empower people to experience our complex age in new, creative ways. To gain the full Artificiality experience, please subscribe at artificiality.substack.com to receive our full publication of audio, video, and written content. Please check out our work as Sonder Studio at getsonder.com and reach out with any comments or questions via email at hello@getsonder.com. Welcome back to Artificiality. We're happy to have you here. Today, we're here to talk about our essay on synthesis. So, Helen, tell me what inspired you to write this essay?
Two things. One, as we think about creativity with generative AI, got to think about what it is that humans do that machines still can't do very well. And I think, after last week's creativity essay, thinking about that a little bit more deeply and coming to the sort of that insight that, it still is about synthesis. It's something that we do that is just so profoundly human, and that synthesis happens with other people. It's the push and pull of an idea, the push and pull on values, the push and pull on debate. And the second thing was something I read this week that said that OpenAI expects to have AGI by the end of this year or something like that, GPT 4.5, GPT 5. And, we're back to this question of, well, what the hell is this thing, AGI? Is it just a multimodal model that can see and maybe hear and eventually, have some sort of proxy for taste? What is it? And when it's actually, at the moment, about language. And it took me back to a book I read a few years ago, which is a profoundly good read, called The Master and His Emissary, by Ian McGilchrist, who's a psychiatrist in the UK. And it's a fantastic book about the difference between the left and the right brain. The first half of the book is about the brain, our brains, and the way the left is different from the right. And the second half of the book is about the sort of tracing the development of essentially the sort of Western world and Western scholarship and values, art, science, through the lens of what was valued, things that the left brain is good at or things that the right brain is good at, with sort of a warning to humanity that if you overemphasize left brain capabilities, you end up with a world that's devoid of colour and meaning and social connection and our ability to create values as a society. And it sort of struck me that there's a real parallel here, and so let's talk about that. That was the inspiration, is to sort of think about AGI through this lens of what are we valuing in intelligence, in an artificial general intelligence, versus what do we value in our natural intelligence.
You start the essay with a story about a child and grains of sand, and you use that as a way to describe differences between human left and right brains, or at least a view of that difference.
Yeah, and it's such a wonderful story, isn't it?
Walk us through that.
Yeah, so imagine this, dear listeners. A child's building up a pile of sand. We've done this, right? We sit at the beach. We remember this as children. We watch our own children do it. And you build it up. But at what point do you decide that that you've got enough grains, that these grains are now a heap? They're not just grains of sand, they're actually a heap. And this decision isn't straightforward, and it's because there's two different things happening at the same time. So there's one process that's a self-contained system. You're building this sand heap analytically, and it's really precise, and you sort of one step at a time. And this process asks what number of grains makes a heap, but that accuracy, you can't step outside the confines of that process without sacrificing accuracy. And so what's the analytical optimization of this many grains make a heap? But then on the other hand, you've got another process that's happening at the same time, which is sort of operating externally and observing the sand heap and questioning its context, its purpose, its potential interest. It's a heap when it's on the beach if it's this big, but if it's in a construction yard, a heap is bigger somehow, right? You can't describe exactly how, but you know it. That's the truth. This process is accepting that kind of ambiguity. Ambiguity is just part of life. And it sees this heap, it emerges. There's this sudden sort of shift in perception. And in this story, the child suddenly understands that the growing pile of sand has suddenly become a heap. It's a decision, it's a judgment. But it's context-laden, and you can never really quite analytically say, suddenly it's a heap. You can't take one grain off and say, not a heap now. What's fascinating to me about this process is that, about these two processes, that our minds just seamlessly integrate these two. It just happens. We understand that. And Ian McGilchrist points out that it's the left brain directing that first process while the right brain manages the second. And even though we have these differing thought processes, our brains unify this experience into one conscious self. Sometimes there's some sort of sense of cognitive dissonance. When I pointed this out to you, that this is happening at the same time, I saw your eyes cross slightly. It's like, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but now you point it out. It's one of those moments. It's this idea that part of our special intelligence, our general intelligence, is that our brains aren't just tools for making sense of things or predicting things. They actually construct our reality for us. That process of, okay, it's a heap. That is a reality that is constructed within us. And that is happening all of the time. And we're constantly trading off what we need to do for ourselves, our own focus on our own bodies and space, our need to maintain homeostasis, our need to, what do we need? We're constantly trading that off with our connection to something larger and our existence through others, our constructing our reality as a, if you like, kind of a heap of people, if you like. It's like the self is formed with this association. When you start thinking about intelligence through that lens, and then you look at a conversation like AGI is suddenly going to appear to us because we have a multimodal model, you look at it and go, hang on a minute, that just doesn't add up. And so it's almost like we're starting to, as we build this AGI, we're starting to sort of contrast it with what it is that we really value in our own intelligence. And this idea that there's a left and a right brain constantly sort of feeding into each other, with the left being very kind of AI-like, precision, operating inside its own system, having very strong skills around language, but not necessarily understanding that context and meaning. Just a nice parallel.
So, if I may, let's set aside the question of AGI, because I think that it's so ill-defined, or it's defined in so many different ways, that we're sort of... I'm finding it difficult to even say whether this is AGI or not, because it just depends on what the definition of AGI is. If your definition is a model that can work across modes, then fine. That's not going to be... That doesn't surprise me that it will happen soon. It's already sort of happening. If it doesn't happen at the model level, it happens at the application level, which is actually what we're experiencing anyway. But let's set that aside because the grand view, the sort of conflict about whether AGI will happen this year or not, is more about what you mean by AGI, right, than not. What I'm finding intriguing about this sort of question of left and right brain is sort of draws back to our conversation with Thi Nguyen, right, around what you can metrify, what you can mathematize in the world. And I'm going to generalize some of the points that we talked about with him, because you think about it, you say, okay, what is, if I'm going to take one grain of sand and I'm going to then get to a heap, well, what's the number that makes a heap? And I think you're totally dead on that what makes a heap is different based on the context. A heap to a small child might be smaller than a heap to an adult. A heap on the beach versus a heap, as you say, in a construction yard. There isn't an exact number, but we know it when we see it, even if we don't all collectively agree, and that's okay, that you could say, well, that's not quite a heap, but that one's definitely a heap, We all have our own view, though, of has it passed that? And it is now defined by that word. And we're sitting here now in this world of generative AI generating words that sound very human-like and probably would write quite interestingly about what a heap of sand is. But if it was to look at an image in this multimodal aspect and say, is that a heap? It's going to have some, is it possible for it to have a concept that says, yes, that's a heap, in a way that we think of it, or we have a yes, it's meeting that definitional threshold without it having an equation where it can look at the heap, it can calculate how many grains of sand are probably in that 3D structure that it sees in the image based on the difference, and it's going to calculate how many grains, and then it goes, yes, is it above or below the number of grains to define that as a heap? Check, right? Like, is it possible?
Well, that point, see, what's interesting about that when you describe that, of course, it's a perfect, but it's also a ridiculous example.
Of course.
A ridiculous, but a perfect example. Because what it comes down to is you sit there, it's not just context. It's not just, okay, in a construction yard, a rule, the heap is different. It's actually what it really comes down to is the math of it's a value equation.
Sure.
Because take it out of being about sand and heaps and what have you and put it into something that is, say maybe a little bit less tangible. Maybe it's love. And what's love versus not love? That depends on so many factors around how you, the network of value, the values that are in that process, in that decision. And I think you're right to point out Thi Nguyen's work, because it does kind of come back to how you even calculate the value. And the thing that is so, I think, interesting about McGilchrist's work that is such an interesting sort of crossover into AI is that the right brain is in charge. And there's this idea that the social context, the fact we were able to humans transcended just the vagaries of natural selection and competition and survival of the fittest to construct our own values, to construct our own communities and our collective, and that the right brain guides that, because the right brain is able to say, here's a heap that I value. And there's a question mark for me that came as I was thinking through this metaphor. And, well, we've built in a left brain with AI. And that could be great. I mean, it is great. But there's this question mark, what would a right brain look like? And is that what we want to build? Do we want to build something that is subservient to us as the synthesizers, where humans synthesize the output and all of the other things that are going on, and we keep AI safely and more in that left brain? Or is there more value, what's the cost benefit, of actually thinking about it as much more of a synthesizing engine for us? And I think that's an open question, technically, philosophically, the whole works. But there's also a choice to make about that becomes much starker when you realize that there is a choice to make about whether AI is going to provide us with more cognitive support for that collective synthesizing process with other humans, or it's not. So we come back again to this idea of how do we avoid collective stupidity with machines in our communities, because everything just happens so much faster at different at scales. So we've got to worry about that. I find that a really intriguing question. I don't know if I have any strong intuitions, certainly not with current designs.
Perhaps I'll make it into a which, not whether question
nice.
for
There's
you.
a nudge for you.
It's a nudge from our book, Make Better Decisions, which you can purchase on Amazon and your local bookstore. Which is a question about whether if it's possible for an AI to be aware of our right brain activities and values, or the value of our right brain, without trying to participate. So I'm thinking about our human experience, that if we are engaging our empathetic, skills, we sometimes can empathize with someone else and try to see the world from their perspective. But also, in some ways, one of the more powerful parts of empathy is understanding when you have a gap. I don't really know what it would be like to be that person in this situation. But I understand that, and I can internalize the fact that I don't understand. So, random story from the news, Taylor Swift has this, extraordinary tour, and then the news comes out that she tipped every one of her truck drivers. There's like 50 truck drivers, which first of all, pause for a moment, that she requires 50 trucks for this tour. That struck me as a big number. But she tipped each one of them two different stories. One is that they were all tipped $100,000, and the other one was just $200,000. Now, it's extraordinarily generous. It's like an order of magnitude or more than most truck drivers get tipped for a tour, or it's like 2 orders of magnitude in some cases, right? It's extraordinary amount of money. Now, Taylor clearly understands that that's valuable to those people, but could she really truly understand how life-changing that is? The stories come out, the head of the trucking company is like, look, these people don't have, most of them are renting homes. They don't have enough money to make a down payment, and now, after driving on this tour, they'll be able to make a down payment on a house. There's something truly different, so that heap of money, right, $100,000, means totally different things to the person who gave it versus the person who received it. Neither one of them would truly understand what it was like to be the other with looking at that heap of money. Yes, I'm making a comparison to the heap of sand. That heap
I've just
of
got
money.
an image of a heap of money. I can
know
get it out of my
it's
head.
a lot of money, right? So, but and no one truly, it wouldn't understand it. That's our right brain, understanding what that heap means to us, but also that we each have our own right brain experience of that heap, and the power is knowing that it is of value to someone else, while also understanding that you're never going to really understand their own true experience. Now, could an AI have something that's sort of analogous to that? Could it be possible that an AI learns that there's these concepts like heap, pile, there's values like lots, small, big,
Fortune.
that mean very different things in context, which includes very different things to an individual in a particular context. So 2 individuals, 5 individuals can have 5 different experiences in the same context. So is it possible for AI to understand that? But I worry that I'm imagining, a computational effect inside of an AI that maybe is possible, but I worry that I haven't really heard anybody in the AI space thinking in this way, to be able to cleave these ideas, these words, these concepts as being things that can be analyzed versus things that are only right brain, experiences, not something that can be analyzed in a mathematical sense.
Well, then you sort of get to some of the the really big topics, which we'll come to eventually in artificiality. But what you described in some ways was going back to how our brains produce this single conscious experience, and that your conscious experience is it shifts as you told that story. It's it's sort of curiosity, feeling of questioning, a little bit of envy, maybe quite a lot. A lot of feelings that come along for the ride with that definition of a heap of money, and I think that's where I pause the essay, if you like, because the right-left brain. One of the reasons I think that the McGilchrist's book is so interesting is he does a lot to go out of the folk definitions of left and right brain and into sort of the more technical things that are going on between the right and the left brain that make it so important for thinking about these large language models, because the way the left brain processes language looks so much more like this closed system of a large language model that is then supervised, if you like. It's subservient to the right brain that has so much more social context, trying to create meaning around whatever's happening. And it's I'd really recommend this book to readers. It is just such an interesting way of thinking about how we process meaning ourselves, and what may be going on underneath some of this conscious experience. It gives a very interesting way of considering how we view the world and how our minds make reality for us and create our conscious experiences without having to get into the technical discussions around sort of current theories of consciousness, which can be kind of confusing to if you haven't gone into them in depth. It's a pretty specialist area, but it's very grounded. It's not a conversation that's densely philosophical. So the second half of the book just brings this so alive with our culture, and that's really what I found so sort of inspirational as a metaphor, because you can see it's another way of seeing how over-promising AI is a really bad idea, and because there's so much else that goes on that we take for granted, that we don't even see. It's so obvious, it's in front of us, and we only start looking for it, we only start analysing it when AI can't do it. And when it comes to moving into this world of creating meaning, creating our own realities, living in the physical world and making judgments and decisions about what something is or isn't, based on so many more factors than just what the AI can see within its graph of images and text, we need to come at it from the other direction as well, and not just and try and pull out some of these these obvious things that we overlook and value them before the machines start trying to put them into math. I mean, that's been the role of philosophy for a long time. But I think it's very interesting to put it right next to AI.
I do too, and I find my mind wandering a little bit to the thinking about how we work with people to incorporate generative AI into their work. Right. So, for those who haven't figured this out, we do work with corporates on things like decision making with generative AI and problem solving with generative AI. And if you think about that, the promise of the sort of marketing shtick about generative AI is that you can ask it a question and it'll give you the answer. We'll go do this. You can then give it. Now we've seen these advances where suddenly everybody's excited because you get to say, "Ooh, I'm a teacher, I'm a marketing manager, I'm a data analyst, and this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and so help me do this." Now, it's quite helpful, but there's a part of the answer that takes quite a lot of knowledge and nuance to not only understand the AI to be able to make value out of that answer, but to be able to understand ourselves and the context in great depth. So I was looking through and comparing the recent earnings announcements from Apple and Amazon, and what are they saying about AI, and how is that going to affect their company and their outcome. And you can think of common language in an earnings announcement. This was high growth. This was successful. Similar words that mean different things to different companies in different contexts. Is this high growth in a high growth overall economy, high growth when there's a recession? Is it successful based on whatever the benchmark was? You start thinking through how we use these common words and how these common words don't just mean different things whether you're a teacher or a marketing manager. They mean a different thing based on whether what subject you're teaching, what school system you're in, what your background is. Like all of those, the context of the individual you means that the language that you're using with the chat system is different for you. But the chat system is aggregating some sort of answer based on some grand training data set, not about you in particular. And so I'm finding this essay to be quite formative in terms of stopping and recognizing where we have a quite profound gap in terms of understanding how to interact with these systems because they lack so much of what is important to us in our right brain.
Yeah, it gave me we've always said that AI doesn't understand context, and then we've had to fuzzy that a little bit because the language models, they give you an appearance they understand context. They definitely have some sort of that analogical reasoning, a little bit of conceptual reasoning. You can see it sort of forming. But
I'm going to interrupt you and say, this is one of those great examples. It understands context, says person A. Well, okay, it understood like 1, 2, 3 examples of context. It does not understand context according to person B, meaning grandly all context, right? Like, so the word itself means different things.
Well, context has become the ultimate context word. I mean, it's like we have that wonderful slide in one of our presentations where it shows you crane in the different parts of the graph. Crane as in a construction crane, crane as in a bird. Now, it understands context as in a crane is a piece of construction equipment, a crane is a creature. It understands that, but it doesn't understand the full context. It doesn't have a feeling that, I have a very different feeling when I think of a crane versus a crane. That catches fish.
In different parts of the world, you might have very different context too, because you don't understand English, but also there aren't cranes everywhere in the world like the birds. So it would be kind of a crazy thing.
Yeah. And so I think it's what it's done, what it shifted for me is just the slight sort of nudge in perspective about how I use these tools. And it doesn't actually necessarily change how I use it per se, but I've become consciously aware of what happens when I reject something from ChatGPT. It's like, it's not just that wasn't a useful suggestion or that I already thought of it or it's not applicable in this situation. It's a deeper discrimination. It's a no, that is not meaningful because I'm trying to synthesize. I'm trying to create something. I'm trying to create a reality. I'm trying to create something that in my mind I judge to be the better fit for what I'm trying to do, and that sort of elevated it a little bit. It elevated my role to that synthesizing mind. And that's pleasurable and it's challenging, and that's what I think a lot of creative work is about. So I was left with a sense of caution about let's not run so fast with AGI that we don't understand that that we are the synthesizing engines, that's what we do, because the reality we're creating is for us. We're not creating a reality for the machine. We don't want a machine to create a reality for us. I think if you ask that, Adam, unless you're the one who takes the pill in the Matrix, whatever. But we value creating our own realities with others.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for writing this piece. For those of you who haven't read it, please head on over to Substack, artificiality.substack.com, and read the essay. Subscribe there to get all of our content and to see what's up from the future. Next up, I believe, on our podcast will be our first returning guest, Michael Bungay-Stanier, who will be joining us to talk about his new book, How to Work with Almost Anyone.
Second returning guest,
true. So he will be. It'll be fascinating to hear him talk about his new book. We did chat with him recently when we were in Lisbon at the House of Beautiful Business, where we spent quite a lot of time with him talking about this and everything else in life. So we'll chat with him about that book and see if he's got any insights about what to do when the anyone is an AI. It's always nice to give Michael something a little extra to sort of chew on. And we have a lot of interesting other guests lined up for the fall. I have a great video series starting up where we're interviewing more entrepreneurs and innovators in AI. So a lot of new content coming out from Artificiality, in addition to all of our artificial philosophy thoughts. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe on Substack or your favorite podcast platform. And please leave a positive rating or comment. Sharing your positive feedback helps us reach more people and connect them with the world's great minds. Seriously, a review on Apple Podcasts is a big deal. And if you like how we think, then contact us about our speaking and workshops and human-centered product design. You can learn more about us at getsonder.com, and you can contact us at hello@getsonder.com. You can learn more about making better decisions in our book, Make Better Decisions: How to Improve Your Decision-Making in the Digital Age. The book is an essential guide to practicing the cognitive skills needed for making better decisions in the age of data, algorithms, and AI. Please check it out at mbd.zone, on Amazon, bookshop.org, or place an order through your favorite local bookstore.
It's better than